You're standing at the refrigerator, holding a sealed container of food. You check the date. It passed 2 days ago. You drop it straight into the trash without a second thought. You just threw away food that was probably still fine. A factory printed a number on the plastic, and you trusted that number more than your own eyes, your own nose, your own hands. Here is something happening right now that proves the point. Starting this week, California is banning sell-by labels on packaged food. The law is called AB 660. After July 1, 2026, companies cannot use the phrase sell-by on consumer packaging anymore. Instead, they have to use best if used by for quality or use by for safety. The reason is simple. Researchers found that confusion over date labels causes a large share of all avoidable food waste in this country. People see a date, assume the worst, and toss food that was never actually unsafe. California lawmakers are calling this a fix, a correction to a labeling system nobody understood. But for many Amish families, less daily life depended on packaged retail food in the first place, which meant the printed label carried far less weight at home. Food safety was something you learned to judge with your own senses, not something a factory told you on a sticker. This video is about that system, the one that worked long before grocery store packaging existed, the one that is still quietly working in Amish kitchens today. Here is the part most people forgot. Before printed dates, every kitchen had to know how to read food directly. Sight, smell, texture. Those three senses did the job that a label does now, except they were more accurate, because they responded to the actual condition of the food, not a guess made at a factory weeks earlier. In Amish kitchens, this wasn't treated as some kind of special skill, it was just how a kitchen ran. A loaf of bread, a crock of pickles, a jar of preserves in the cellar. Each one was checked by hand and by nose before it ever went on the table. There was no packet with a stamped number to consult. There was only the food itself, and a person who knew what to look for. This is the difference between a recipe and a system. A recipe tells you what to do once. A system tells you how to keep doing it, season after season, without wasting what you work to put up. Think about what waste actually costs a household. Not in some abstract environmental sense. In the literal sense. Every jar that spoils before it gets used is wasted flour, wasted sugar, wasted hours of work, wasted money that already left your pocket. In a culture built around growing and preserving your own food, throwing food away wasn't a small inconvenience. It was a direct loss. Waste is a cost. That phrase will come back more than once in this video, because it sits at the center of everything Amish pantry logic was built around. The reason much of this knowledge disappeared was not because it stopped working. It disappeared because convenience became easier to sell than judgment. A household that trusts itself buys differently than a household that depends on a label. Compare that to how most people live now. Grocery prices keep climbing. Inflation makes every wasted item feel heavier than it used to. And yet most people still throw food away based on a printed guess, instead of checking what's actually in front of them. The old women in Amish kitchens didn't need a stamp. They had a system. That system is what this video is going to walk through, piece by piece, so you can use it too. Picture an Amish kitchen on a quiet morning. Flour on the counter from bread day. A crock on the shelf, slightly cloudy with fermentation. A cellar door at the back of the room. Cool air drifting up from the stone steps below. Three things are doing the work here that a printed date does everywhere else. What the food looks like, what it smells like, and how it feels. Start with sight. This is the first sense, and it catches the most obvious problems early. Fuzzy mold growing on the surface of something is a clear stop sign, but not every change in appearance means spoilage. A layer of white crystals on a hard, aged cheese is often a harmless sign of natural aging, not a sign of danger. Learning to tell the difference between a real warning and a normal change was part of what made this system reliable instead of guesswork. Next is smell. This is where most spoilage gets caught before it ever becomes a problem you can see. Fermented foods naturally carry a sharp, tangy smell from lactic acid, the same process that makes sauerkraut and pickles taste the way they do. That smell is supposed to be there. It's a sign the food preserved itself successfully. Spoilage smells different. It's not tangy, it's foul. A heavy, rotten, something is wrong smell that your body recognizes instantly, even if you've never been taught to name it. In Amish kitchens, the nose did a lot of the work that an expiration date pretends to do now, and it did it with more accuracy. because it was responding to the food in front of you, not a calendar. Last is texture. Run your hand over raw meat or vegetables, and you can feel when bacteria has started breaking things down. A slick, slimy film on the surface is the clearest sign. It means bacterial activity has already started changing the structure of the food, even if the smell hasn't fully caught up yet. Texture often tells you something before your nose does, which is why touch was never skipped in this system. Sight, smell, texture, together, those three senses formed something more reliable than a stamped number ever could, because they responded to reality instead of a guess made in advance. Now here is where the old knowledge connects to actual science, in plain language, without turning this into a chemistry lecture. Every method of food preservation comes down to controlling a handful of basic conditions: how acidic the food is, how much usable water is sitting inside it, and how much oxygen it's exposed to. That's the whole game. Once you understand those three things, the old methods stop feeling mysterious and start feeling logical. High-acid foods last longer than low-acid foods, because acidity creates an environment that's hostile to the kind of bacteria that cause spoilage and illness. This is why apple scrap vinegar, the kind made by saving cores and peels instead of throwing them away, works so well as a preserving agent. It's also why pickled vegetables can sit in a crock for weeks without going bad, while fresh vegetables left on a counter spoil in days. The acid is doing real protective work, not just adding flavor. Salt and sugar work differently, but toward the same goal. Both of them bind up water inside food, making that water unavailable to the microbes that need it to grow. This is why cured meats and heavily sweetened preserves can be stored far longer than their fresh versions. The food isn't magically immune to bacteria. It's just been made into an environment where bacteria can't easily survive because the water they need has been locked away. And then there's temperature, which is where the Amish root cellar comes in. A cellar dug into the ground stays naturally cool and stable, without any electricity or mechanical refrigeration. That stable cold temperature slows down the enzymes inside food that would otherwise keep breaking it down after harvest. It's not preservation through technology, it's preservation through geography and design, using the natural temperature of the earth instead of a compressor and a power bill. This is the part that deserves real attention, because old methods only stay safe when they're paired with real limits. Trusting your senses does not mean ignoring danger. It means knowing exactly where the line sits and never crossing it. Some things cannot be salvaged, no matter how confident you feel reading the signs. Mold on a soft cheese is one of them. Unlike hard cheese, where surface mold can sometimes be addressed safely, soft cheese has a texture that lets mold spread invisibly beneath the surface, which means visible mold on soft cheese means the whole thing goes. A can jar with a bulging lid is another hard stop. That bulge is a sign of gas building up inside, and gas buildup in a sealed jar is one of the warning signs of Clostridium botulinum, the bacteria responsible for botulism. This bacteria thrives specifically in low oxygen conditions and in foods that aren't acidic enough, which is exactly what a sealed, low-acid jar provides if it wasn't processed correctly. You cannot smell botulinum. You cannot see it reliably. The bulging lid, or a seal that's been compromised, is one of the only outward warnings you get, and it has to be respected every single time. Rancid meat is the same story. Once meat smells off in that sharp, sour, something has turned way, no amount of cooking or seasoning brings it back to safe. The senses that work so well for catching early spoilage are exactly the senses you use to draw this line. Amish does not mean unsafe. It means knowing precisely where caution has to take over from confidence. When in doubt, the food gets thrown out. That rule never bends, no matter how much work went into making it. This is also where the line gets drawn against modern shortcuts that try to skip the senses entirely. Trendy preservation hacks that promise no real fermentation time, or canning shortcuts that skip proper processing, remove the very checks that made traditional preservation safe in the first place. The Amish system wasn't fast. It wasn't designed for convenience. It was designed for reliability, built on knowledge that got tested generation after generation, not on a shortcut someone tried once and filmed. Now let's walk through how this actually plays out in a kitchen, step by step, the way it would happen in practice rather than in theory. The first thing Amish kitchens did differently was check the food itself before checking anything else. No glance at a label first. The container gets opened, and the food gets looked at, smelled, and sometimes touched, before any decision gets made. This single habit alone prevents most of the unnecessary waste that comes from trusting a printed guess over the actual condition of what's in front of you. The second part was smaller than most beginners expect, and it has to do with smell specifically. Before deciding anything, the food gets a real smell test, not a quick sniff from a foot away. Lactic, tangy smells from fermented foods are expected and safe. Sharp, rotten, foul smells are not. Learning that difference takes a little practice, but it's not complicated once you've smelled both a few times. The third part involves texture, and this one catches people off guard the most. A slick or slimy film on the surface is a clear signal, even when the smell hasn't fully developed yet. Touch was never treated as optional in this system. It often caught problems before the nose did. The fourth part is knowing the safe middle ground on mold. Hard cheeses can sometimes have surface mold addressed, because the dense structure limits how far mold can spread beneath the surface. Soft cheeses cannot. This distinction matters, and confusing the two is one of the most common mistakes people make when they try to apply old wisdom without understanding the actual reasoning behind it. The fifth part is using acid, salt, and sugar deliberately, not as flavor choices, but as preservation tools. Pickling, salting, and sweetening were never just about taste in a traditional kitchen. They were active methods for controlling water and acidity, which is what actually keeps food safe over time. Store-bought condiments use the same basic chemistry, just packaged differently and sold back to you at a markup. The sixth part is checking seals and lids on anything canned or jarred, every single time, before anything else happens. A compromised seal or a bulging lid ends the conversation immediately. No sensory test overrides that. This step exists specifically to catch the dangers that sight, smell, and texture can miss, like the threat of botulism in improperly processed low-acid foods. The seventh and final part is the rule that ties everything together. When something feels uncertain, even after checking sight, smell, and texture, it gets thrown out. Not because the system failed, but because the system was built to fail safely. Trusting your senses was never about being reckless. It was about being accurate, with a hard stop built in for anything that crossed into real risk. Step back and look at what all of this adds up to. The grocery store sold the packet. The kitchen kept the habit. A printed date is convenient, but convenience was never the same thing as accuracy. It was a system built for store shelves and stock rotation, not for the actual condition of food sitting in your refrigerator at home. In Amish households, low waste wasn't a trend or a lifestyle choice picked up from a magazine. It was built into daily life because nothing was treated as disposable by default. Flour took labor to grow and mill. Sugar and salt were resources, not throwaway ingredients. A jar of preserves represented hours of work from the previous harvest season. Wasting any of it wasn't just careless. It worked against everything the household was trying to build toward. That's why Amish pantry logic kept circling back to the same idea, over and over. Waste is a cost, not an environmental talking point. A direct cost to the people sitting at that table. Think about how that compares to a modern household throwing out food based on a printed guess, week after week, without ever checking what was actually wrong with it. Some studies suggest the average American spends over $1,000 a year on food that's never eaten. A large share of that waste traces directly back to date label confusion, the exact confusion that California is now trying to legislate away with AB 660. Amish households never had that problem to begin with, because the system never depended on a stamped number from a factory. The printed date was a suggestion. The knowledge in that kitchen was the system, and the system worked, season after season, long before any law had to step in and fix what packaging confusion broke. If you're the kind of person who's tired of throwing food away because a sticker told you to, this way of thinking changes how you walk through your own kitchen. You start checking instead of guessing. You start trusting your senses again, the way kitchens did for generations before printed dates existed at all. Did your mother or grandmother have a way of checking if milk, preserves, or a jar from the cellar was still good, without ever looking at a date? Maybe she smelled the jar before opening it. Maybe she checked the seal with her thumb out of habit, without even thinking about it. Write that memory in the comments. Those small habits carried more knowledge than most people realize. If you want more of this, the real systems behind Amish kitchens, scratch cooking, and food that doesn't depend on a grocery store shelf, subscribe and stay close. There's a lot more of this worth learning. Waste is a cost. Your senses were always the better system.